Good morning. If you're a gal, we're going to pick your brain. We want you to come up with a family budget for us to go back to the traditional family. If you have a three-bedroom brick house and a couple of kids and a husband to take care of, how big of a budget would you need to come across with clothes and food and piano lessons for the little guys and tennis lessons for yourself? If you're going to do the producing, then you do the consuming. And if we have a number, then we can work with that. And if you're a guy, how many hours do you have to work? In my school days, it would be, they would always pick on the plumber, the proverbial plumber. How much does a plumber make in Australia these days? And or the guy who drives a forklift, or the average Joe. And you add up how many hours. If you have those two numbers, you can go to work. And the idea is to realize that we did have a revolution uh, in the 1970s. This is coming to you from Tucson, Arizona, and here in Tucson, there was a profound change in our society in the 1970s. The United States, by the way, is usually just a few years behind Great Britain and Australia and you guys, and so we just followed along with the trend. We went from home economics to individual rights. Home economics, by the way, is when the married couple is viewed as the basic economic building block. It's the smallest economic thing. You have a young couple and you have a house, and then you go off to the side and start with farming and mining, and then above that, manufacturing, and above that, wholesale, retail, and repair, and above that, retirement, education, and recreation. And doctors and lawyers form a kind of lattice that holds it all together. And it's the Catholic priest that causes it to come into being to begin with. It's a God and country thing. This is all a religious thing. It comes out of the Pope and monks in monasteries. And then you have a, a sense of you will the good of another person. There's three things that make up God and country: straightening up your emotions, willing the good of another person, and doing it because it's a religious argument, because of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist and Mass and that sort of thing. That's the stuff you hold as faith. And then you turn around and uh, uh, you have a normal, well-adjusted person, which is not a natural thing. And then it turns into home economics, it turns into a normal supply and demand curve. And all this was thrown out in the 1970s and in favor of the consumption society for individual rights. And now it's just hitting bottom, and you're in dire straits. And people are plunging into poverty because of that. The whole idea is to cause our society to crash. And well, they never really say what happens after that, except for lots of people starve. And if you're part of that, you can hopefully do something about it here. And you're just going to have to speak up. You're just going to have to be that yank and turn around and say enough is enough. It's actually a four-step process to do something about it. And the first step is to publicize a sense of original sin. It's not a natural thing, and you have to explain things, come up with a course that teaches people first a sense of original sin, and then how to stand up to a bum's rush. People who pull a bum's rush think people who know how to manipulate, intimidate, hustle, and con are the very idea of the bad guys in this outfit. The good guys go in the other direction. The good guys straighten themselves up emotionally and will the good of another person. They say what they mean and mean what they say. Once they become a professional person, for want of a better way, they become a good husband to a wife, a good wife to a husband, then a good mother and father, and then a good citizen. And that's what makes up the household unit. The same people that do the producing do the consuming, and you're off and running. You have the, how do they say it? leadership quality of washing the feet of the apostles, turning into a normal supply and demand curve. And that's how you get a huge middle class. Believe it or not, here in Tucson, in the United States in the 1950s, you got a job as an apprentice mechanic and got married, and you could get into a starter house. The idea of that huge middle class is simply thrown out. And so we're hoping you'll join the gang and start chiming in and saying just what it is. How many hours would you have to work? If you're in Australia, this is sort of geared towards the gang in Australia, this particular live show. If you're a young gal and you straighten yourself up and be a terribly Australianish character, how much money do you have to make to get the shop up and running? You've got to put a number on it and start calling in. Once you do that, and they can figure out how many hours the young man has to work in order to come up with that, then you can do something about it. You know where you want to go, you know where you are, and you just get started. Just as was said, one of the things about the women's liberation movement was that they never really were in the workplace. They were the consumption society. And it went something like this. In the 1970s, they had Billie Jean King and the tennis players and the women's liberation movement, Hillary Clinton and those characters. They had the sexual revolution. They started making money by causing other people to have to work more hours. And they did it because they decided there was no God, absolutely no love in them, absolutely no empathy. And it worked, is what it amounts to. And so go back to around the 1970s, they entered the workplace, and let's say they still only made 90 cents on the dollar as a guy. The bum's rush was that the guy was still making his income that paid the gas bill and the electric bill and the grocery bills. And so for that brief moment, that decade or two, the gal, her income was luxury income. It was consumption income. And what did they do with it? Well, they went out and they got into a duplex instead of a house, and they rented it out to, around here, Mexicans, so they could, and so they love to say, we'll hire the Mexicans and give them the jobs nobody wants. So it's a saying around here. That was a few decades ago. I think things have changed now. And so they would get in a duplex and have somebody else pay their mortgage. And when they did that, that was when the flip-flop happened. It was actually an act of treason. Instead of putting the people who were at the bottom of that huge middle class were now plunged into a class of poverty, and they had to start renting property. And over time, it just got bigger and bigger. It's called the lazy V. And over here is about the 1970s, and then the flip-flop, and you could see the lazy V in the most stereotypical fashion. The rich get rich and the poor get poor. The bums rush there. It's around here, the people who did that are all liberals. You can't think in terms of Republican and Democrat, or you have to think in terms of people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people, as opposed to the gal who went back and asked the 10-year-old what he wanted for his birthday. And so the middle class got smaller and smaller, and these people got a chance to move into the foothills and be the upper class in a peasant and property class society. They did all the consuming, and everybody else does all the producing for them. When you think about it, that's what communism is in its purest form. It really isn't about the state owning everything. It's about them taking control. If you picture American slavery with this big, beautiful southern mansion, and everybody else living in the slave quarters, whether they call it the slave quarters or communist housing projects or slums, they're all the same thing. Everything's done for the people who live in the big house. And if you do that intentionally, you philosophically hold absolutes. They control the press. They'll shoot you and your wife and your kids and your grandpa if you say anything bad about them. And they force you to, well, uh, spend your life producing things for them. As an example, in the Soviet Union, even though there were so many people around here talking about how good communists were, they were all university professors. It took about 10 years to get a car in the Soviet Union. When you could get a car, you could put a big American car in the driveway of the average Joe around here. Our standard of living for the repairman and plumber was outrageously high. And so all they had to do was polish it up and get good at it. And instead, they threw it all out. They reached a point in society where they could either get onto a maintenance level or they could pig out, and they chose the latter. And if God is love, they have absolutely no love in them, no empathy, and well, they just did it. This is true in Australia. On the channel Priest and Pimp, and on another channel, the Priest and the Pimp Media Access. Media Access. The two YouTube channels and a Facebook channel. There's several anecdotes. And I invite you to go look at them, and they would help you. One of the things that has to happen, though, is it has to come from you. You can't wait for Donald Trump to come in and save the day. You have to stand up and help out a little bit, the average Joe. What's wrong? They threw out God and country. What do you do about it? You go back to God and country. Instead of, course, saying there is no God, you replace it with saying there is only God. You replace you become blatantly Catholic. You replace those judges in the Supreme Court with canon law judges. Here in the United States, if you can't be a Yank, physically a Yank, without being philosophically Catholic, well, you're philosophically Catholic. And now a Yank appears, you can go to work. Everything this country stood for, they threw out. And so you have to get that back. And it's going to be up to you to do something about it. And it's as true in Australia as it is in Great Britain, as it is here in the United States. Hold on. As an example, to make a point, one of the things you would argue when you hear people arguing are things such as they want to raise the minimum wage in fast food joints around here. And the minimum wage is so outrageously high. And you hear people protesting, they want to raise the wages. And from this point of view, you just shake your head, say, no, don't do that. And the people next to them, countering them, want to say, let the marketplace handle everything. And you just say, no, don't do that either. Decades ago, when the person you're listening to was in school, of a stereotypical do-gooder degree, and when I graduated, there was something horribly wrong, so I started going back and taking classes here and there. I took classes in the physics department, for example. Don't ask me if I passed any of it, but I did learn a few things. And here and there, one of the things I learned went something like this: the university professors, the ones that come across as so stereotypical liberal and so stereotypically intellectual as an emotion, they would get together and they would invest in fast food franchises and maybe a 4-unit apartment to rent out so they could get some extra income. And there was an explosion of food franchises, what we're using. And you just sit back when you realize what's going on. You say, look, they're reinstitutionalizing teenagers back in the workplace. They'd only everybody who worked there were teenagers, even the managers, for the most part. They would have one guy who knew what he was doing and several franchises with teenagers running the show. And they would work them for about 6 hours a day, and then without any rest, and never more than 20 or 30 hours, because if they worked one more hour, they would have to pay workman's comp and other things. And so they wouldn't do it, and they were horrible at it. They literally reinstitutionalized teenagers back and old people and women back in the workplace. People went to war to get to go in the other direction. And now that adjustment's made, and you see people trying to work at a McDonald's as a living. No, you don't do that. You don't raise the minimum wage. It'll just trash everything. You can't afford to go there to begin with, and you don't let the marketplace handle it. The marketplace is another phrase for parameters of competition. And if you arrange the parameters of competition so that there'll be a large middle class, there'll be a large middle class. If you breed a breed of normal, well-adjusted people, then there'll be a breed of normal, well-adjusted people. They threw that out. And so what do? You go downtown, you excuse those judges, and I know they won't be violent. I know they'll stand down, they'll get a garbage sack and go form a class of peasantry beneath the class of poverty that they caused. And then you have a choice. If there is no God, you just get yourself a Cuban cigar and you rule the roost. If Christ did rise on the third day, if you take a religious argument, then you go and find some poor slob of a criminal trial attorney that defends the poor and the oppressed, and you insist that he's a judge, or you insist that he's a lawyer. You insist that he takes Wednesdays off and lives in a doctors and lawyers neighborhood, and he plays in that silly tennis tournament you guys have every year, and you insist on it at the point of a pistol. That's goes against Mother Nature. It's actually the most violent position you can take. And so I drifted a little bit. You go downtown, you replace those judges, you go back to God and country, you have a citizenry of normal, well-adjusted people, and then some guy goes to college and he gets a business degree. He gets together with a guy with a degree in culinary arts, and a lawyer and an architect, and they form a franchise. Then they go over to the high school and they find the future chef, and they put that guy into his own franchise, as if you take your hand and push away, subsidiary. So it would be only an owner-operator franchise, and he himself would have some rules. He couldn't hire teenagers. You give a teenager a chance to grow up around here. And if you did that, everything would change. You would start to have this huge middle class. The benefits of it are a huge middle class, very little poverty, and kids have shoes on their feet, and they've gone to the dentist, and you're the ones taking time out to go play tennis on Saturday. If you're going to do the consuming, you get to do the recreating. The downside is you can't be the one to go up in the foothills and be a professional dandy and watch everybody produce things for you. There'll always come a point in society where you have that choice. And you have to turn around and say, no, we won't do that in our society. And the reasons we don't do that is because we decided that we would take the religious road, the God and country road, the road where you're normal and well-adjusted as best a human being could be. You, by the way, you're not going to bat 300, no less be any good at it. But if you see priests and nuns who do that professionally, they only bat about 300, and they're exceptionally good. And look how good society is. Look how good the United States was post-World War II. That was the ideal society. They were trying to do it, and all they had to do is polish things up, and other people destroyed that. So, excuse me, if you're listening to this, and if you can, or you hear somebody, please call in and chime in on the chat. And let us know if you're a housewife or you're a gal. I don't think you can afford to be a housewife anymore. Take a good guess, a reasonably professional guess. This is what I need to get things going and starting. Here in Tucson, we went the other way. In one of our anecdotes, I started out with a gal who was a trained secretary, and they're making about $45,000 a year, which on the one hand is outrageously good. I mean, $45,000 seems like a lot of money. And then it turns out to be absolutely nothing. And so she makes $45,000 a year. That is a very good salary. That's a trained gal, and she doesn't stand a chance. And we said she only has one child, and she can't do it anyway. You can't take care of a 3-year-old and work. You've got a job working. You just can't do both. But that said, we started adding up the numbers. It was about $900 around here for daycare as an average, about $1,600 for a not very nice apartment, 1 bedroom, but it was the only other cheaper ones you wouldn't want a child to live in. And you started adding up insurance, how much for a car, how much for car insurance, how much for medical insurance, how much for dental insurance. And dental insurance is usually a fraction of what you actually have to spend. And it goes it goes so far past her income, her disposable income, so quickly that it's ridiculous. In other words, you can't do it, and you're not going to be able to do it. You're either going to watch society collapse, or you turn around and start to stand up to this stuff. Just so it said, what do you do? Well, it's a 4-step process. The first step is to come up with a course, a 16-week lesson plan that teaches a fellow first a sense of original sin. Everybody gets to a point where they just shake and shiver and they want to attack. And here in our little world, we take a step back and we'll put the priest on one side and the pimp on the other. And the priest says, say what you mean what you say, everything else comes from the evil one. And then there's a flip-flop and off to the other side, and there's a pimp. And the pimp says, hey, the pimp knows how to manipulate, intimidate, hustle, and con. And he's considered the bad guy in this world. And there's a sense of original sin. Without sounding too earthy, both the Catholic and the communist, the atheist and the communist, define mental illness, both the Catholic and the atheist define mental illness as the normal taken into the abnormal. It's a definition of mental illness, a shop manual definition. The Catholics say, hold on here, Joe, go backwards. From a cold to the flu to pneumonia, go backwards from pneumonia back to the flu and back to a cold. The normal is normal, but it's not good enough. For example, if a young man sits there and he fantasizes about the gals, then he opens his eyes, looks around the room, and does it again, only this time he's fantasizing about actually getting the gal pregnant. And there you go. That's not a natural thing at all. And with a snap of a finger, you can see what original sin is. The normal is normal, but not good enough. If you add fear to that, and the idea that your attitude changes because of your environment, and the fact that you have to be taught that, it's a famous phrase, what takes away your free will? Fear, sex, ignorance, and violence. You have to be taught that. And the only way you can get a sense of free will is if you add Christ into the equation. That computer cloud of, or that cloud of computer electrons that you try and tune into, that gets you to turn around and have the grand deduction, you start to be normal and well-adjusted. And that you have to have. A few other things, and then we'll sign off. Here are 3, there's a routine of a pimp. You know how a pimp recruits a prostitute, don't you? It's a 3-step process. The first step is to isolate the gal. She's a 15-year-old runaway, and he isolates her from her friends, and he keeps her from walking in one direction or another. He sort of cuts her off. And from the point of view of the gal, she can't walk in this direction or that direction. And that's stage one. Stage two, he touches her in some fashion. He grabs her, he shakes her hand, only now he doesn't let go. And now he's gone from someplace out there to someplace here. And then he says something like this: "Why, I have a temper and I just don't know what I do when I have a temper." Then he says, "Right," and he sort of shakes and jumps at her. And from the point of view of the gal, she says something like this. And now he's in her mind. She says something like this: "This guy's telling me I better be afraid of him or he's going to kill me. I can't beat him up, so I better just play along. I better act. But I'm not very good at acting, and this is terribly serious. So I'll do what actors do. I shall get into character." And her attitude changes. And that's it. He's got her. From out there to here to in here. And that's how a pimp recruits a prostitute. And I'm being vain when I talk about a 15-year-old gal instead of adults in our society. And that the only way you're going to get around that is if you have an outside imposed thing that allows you to change your attitude back. Catholic confession is the classic example of that. A few other things that might help you. If you listen to music, well, use sex. You close your eyes and fantasize about the gals and go back to the 1950s on the computer, and there's Doris Day and Patti Page and that gang. And they were gals that you got married to, and it was them personally. You could sort of punch them in the arm. You got married to them personally, and you started a family and got going. And then the toggle switch was flipped back then. And then there was Marilyn Monroe. And Marilyn Monroe was a gal that you fantasized about having sex with, but you didn't get her pregnant. And even though you didn't get her pregnant, she had this endearing, "I like you" attitude. And a few years later, there's Jane Fonda. And Jane Fonda was just, "Oh, let's have sex." And there was no love or there was no personal, there was nothing to that in there. And then a few years later, there was Yoko Ono, John Lennon, the Beatles, and Yoko Ono. And I'll let you look her up in the computer, and maybe somebody can call in and put that into words. And then in the 1970s, Billie Jean King, and she was a representative of the women's liberation movement. She was also, if you'll give me, I apologize if I was wrong, she was the tennis gal who started professional tennis and that sort of thing. She was a representative of the women's liberation movement. She beat a professional tennis guy on national TV. They made a big deal of it. And at least around here, she was a homosexual. She was gay. And the scuttlebutt, very popular scuttlebutt, was that she was taking steroids from her brother, the baseball player, and she took enough steroids to become homosexual. And she was so noticeably more masculine than other gals there that was silly. It turned out there's only about 10 gals in the professional tennis that was started, and at least 3 of them were that way. You could see that were gay. One of them was Martina Navratilova, but she has an awfully good excuse. She came over the Iron Curtain, and they were giving her steroids, testosterone, and that sort of thing without even telling them. Please keep in mind that's communism, the prima donna intellectuals government, the one they say is so darn good. And those are the sort of things they would do to the gals. They never even bothered to ask them. Excuse me, I sort of drifted a bit. So if you think of Doris Day and then that flip-flop, and then Marilyn Monroe turning into Jane Fonda, and Yoko Ono and Billie Jean King, you have an idea of moral relativism. You can use music. You can feel the music when Doris Day sang in that group, and then you can feel the toggle switch. And there was the Ronettes and the Beach Boys. The Ronettes were considered nasty girls, believe it or not. And then you can follow the music into Woodstock and into the disco era, the 1970s. And that was the highlight of the Darwin alpha male, the guy who was the top of the class chimpanzee type. And what did they do? Well, they had all the drugs they could. They got into all the real estate and rental property they could. They became the professional consumers. And for some reason, that's the sexiest guy there is. If you joined the Green Berets, for example, and you went out and defended the poor and the oppressed, you weren't as sexy as those guys. And you weren't as scummy either. Being courageous, brave, and strong, kind, compassionate, and justice isn't there a lot. And you can feel music going up. If you want to have fun, turn around and head in the other direction, as if you went into a gym. You would go back in time from the 70s, when the disco era, and back into those goofy conservative Woodstock characters, and then go back into those very nerdy Herman's Hermits and going in that direction. And then you put the flip-flop, you put that sack that's inside out, right side in, and you're back to the singers of the 50s, Steve Lawrence and Eddie Gourmet and that sort of thing. That's our definition of moral relativism. Another example that will help you is turning on the radio, or excuse me, the computer, and listening to a song called Alice's Restaurant. Alice's Restaurant was a iconic song at the time. It was very long, 15, 20 minutes. It was a true story. And in the end, he wanted you to stand up for communism. And the story went, you listen to it once and you feel the emotion. In the end, you want to be cool and sophisticated and do the right thing. And so you start standing up for the communists. And listen to it again. Listen to it a second time. Only this time tell yourself, this is an exercise and you're going to try and separate the emotion from what's actually happening. And as you listen to it again, you realize that the guy who, Arlo Guthrie, this is the singer, he went to visit a friend of his who had a restaurant for Thanksgiving, going to have Thanksgiving dinner with him. And either his buddy and his wife, or him and his buddy and his wife, his restaurant had accumulated all this garbage. And so they put all this garbage in the back of a hipster VW bus, and they went out in the desert and dumped it all out in the desert. And wait a minute, I don't know, I know very few people that actually like that kind of guy. And so there's a distinct separation between the emotion and what actually happened. And to continue, some cop found the pile of garbage, and he went out and he went digging through it and found a receipt and hunted him down and arrested him. Good. I knew my share of cops in my time, and very few of them would get their uniforms dirty, but not this guy. But he was portrayed as a bad guy. And in reality, bless his heart, he did his job, which is kind of rare around here. He did his job. And they were arrested, and they were in court with glossy, what did the song say? 10 by 12 colored glossy photos with circles and arrows and a paragraph describing what was going on. And they found him guilty, and he had to pay a big fine and go pick up the garbage. Good for him. And in the end, he wanted you to fight against the war. If you want to stop war, you have to start singing loudly, he says. And there was a bummed rush. You don't stand up for communism, you stand up against war, said with a wink and a nod. And if you can separate your emotions from what's actually going on, you'll have learned a good lesson on how to take into account original sin. To have your emotion heading in one direction and the facts heading in another. That's two. Here's a third one. A third one is to watch the movie The Exorcist. That too is based on a true story. And in the movie, the older priest shows up to help the younger priest exorcise this little girl, perform an exorcist on this little girl. And the younger priest, who's a trained psychiatrist, turns to the older priest and he says, look, I think there's 3 separate personalities in this gal. And the older priest looks at him and says, no, there's just one. And that's a good example of the 1950s when they would say, are they communists or fascists? And the answer is no. They're the cruel, queer, atheistic communists and fascists. And they're a bunch of queer scoundrels. And that's a good example of that. And then the older priest turns to the younger priest and he says, watch it. Don't believe a word that comes out of her mouth. He is a master of deceit. He'll mix truths with lies, with half-truths and half-lies, and he'll play on your emotion. So don't listen to anything that comes out of her mouth. And that's an example of the application of evil. Evil, diabolic, to tear things apart. In classical philosophy was usually another way of saying Catholicism. People who are evil are people who hustle, con, manipulate, and intimidate people. And that's what they're talking about. And to continue in that movie, say the bad guy himself, the guy that gets the little girl's head to start spinning around in a circle. When the director was making the movie, the director said, he only used the word Satan once, and that's it, because the words don't describe the emotion. And what is that emotion? That emotion is the complete absence of what was in the Catholic priest. And that's what the definition of pure evil is. There's Christ and that emotion inside him. The complete absence of that is a thing. And that's the thing that gets the little girl's head spinning around. That's the one that seems to rule the roost, especially these days in our society. And so the idea is to start standing up to it. In order to stand up to it, you're going to have to go in the other direction. You're going to have to be that gal that says enough is enough. If you say so, then it can do something about it. By the way, just to get things out, in the 1950s, it was the stereotypical housewife that did all the consuming. As well, the advertising is geared toward it. And it was another one of those things that came out completely opposite. And that's what you have to do. You have to say, okay, this is enough. This is the money I need. My 10-year-old can't pay for me. So you just come across with the credit card and be quiet and let me go to work. If you can do that, and then you know how many hours the average Joe has to work in order to come up with that, you can get started and get going. I can't help thinking of going on the computer and these gals that come on the computer and they're just beside themselves. And there's this one gal, and she's hiding in the closet because she's sharing a room with her toddler and doesn't want to wake the little guy up. And she says, I just can't do this anymore. And she can't do it anymore. There's no emotion. You can't get emotionally worked up when it's for real. That's just a lot of nonsense for other people who protest. When it's for real, your emotion, your base emotion, going to leave you. And then you have to do something about it. You have to man up and go over and grab her by the hand and drag her over to a nice house and with a bedroom for her little kid and probably a couple extra around here and watch things change. By the way, if you're going to do this and you're a young gal, I'm close to being right, but don't hold me to it. It might be, say, a bedroom that's 10 by 12 feet that can hold 2 boys, 2 girls. And a house might have so many square feet. It needs a living room to live in and a dining room, a kitchen to support the dining room, and a bedroom to sleep in and a bathroom, that sort of thing. And you try and view it as if it was a shop to get everybody out of poverty and into plenty, into a feeling of plenty. And that's what needs to happen. Well, I'm going to sign off now, and I'll try and come back next week and try and pass the word and get your gang together. Remember, there's a group on Facebook called Time to Act. I wish you would please join it and pass the word. And on the YouTube channel, Priest and Pimp. I guess it should be Priest or Pimp, shouldn't it? The Priest and the Pimp is a reference to the classic battle of good and evil. The priest says, say what you mean and mean what you say, and the pimp is on the other side. And so we hope you'll join our gang in the playground, and then we can go to work.